having a discussion on disaster preparedness. Of course, we are still in the 2021 transatlantic hurricane season. And we know that in this season, we can have tropical storms, we can have hurricanes, and anything is possible. And what we do know is that we must be prepared. Disaster preparedness is extremely important to mitigate against the impact, the serious impact of any disaster. And so today the discussion will center around the disaster preparedness. And I have with me in studio to my right Mr. Livingston Pemberton. Mr. Pemberton is the Chief Engineer at the Public Works Department, and he is filling in today for the chair of the Damage Assessment and Needs Analysis Subcommittee. The chair of that committee is the Director of Public Works, Mr. George Gilbert, who could not be here today. And Mr. Pemberton is capably filling his shoes. And I have to my left Miss Michelle Rodriguez. She is the new face at the National Emergency Management Agency. She is the new Public Relations Officer. She has replaced Miss Vesta Southwell, who gave sterling service in that role at NEMA for many years. Michelle and Livingston, welcome.
Thank you, Leslie.
Right, we are hearing a lot today about disasters and how disasters really are impacting people. They're impacting our planet. They are causing a lot of destruction, damage to infrastructure, wildlife, crops, and all of that. They can be quite destructive. And we have seen the destructive powers of disasters. We have seen it here in our federation, and we have seen it elsewhere, especially when we turn on our televisions and so on. Whether there are raging fires, bushfires somewhere in Australia, or in Greece, or in California, or tsunamis. We've seen the deadly impact of earthquakes. We've seen the deadly impact of over in Asia, what you call them, those typhoons, and so on. And a lot of it is happening, and while all of this is happening, it is being blamed on climate change. And more than ever, we are hearing how our behavior impacts the climate and what we can do to help the environment and what we can do to mitigate against the detrimental impacts of climate change. Michelle, NEMA plays a key role in that it is an agency, the central agency in St. Kitts and Nevis that is responsible for the management of disasters, emergencies. Those disasters are not necessarily just hurricanes. Although some people used to think that NEMA was just about hurricanes. But hurricane is not the only disaster. And we have to think in terms of comprehensive disaster management and preparedness. Now, you are new at NEMA, but what is your role as a public relations officer?
Mr. Williams, thank you again for having me. My role, actually, I have a big task to fill, is to be the voice of NEMA, to disseminate information, to keep the public abreast and equipped with the necessary information that they need to know with relatively to any disaster that is likely to affect us. And there are various mediums that we're utilizing and platforms to ensure that we get our messages across and across clearly, also with the assistance of the Met Office, especially with regards to our hurricanes and our storms.
Right, so you deal a lot with the communication because
Yes.
the management of any disaster, a big part of it has to do with communication
Correct.
and how the information is basically communicated. So who are some of the key persons with whom NEMA communicates?
NEMA
Or the key agencies or the key stakeholders?
Well, first of all, we communicate with all the media houses. We have a very good rapport with all of them, as well as the the digital flow and all the other stakeholders who we will have to engage from time to time to assist us in disseminating our information across the entire Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. And also, we would engage the Met Office too, and anyone who is relatively involved in assisting us in getting our information across as well.
Mm-hmm. So you work along closely, of course, with the Government Information Service as well,
Yes.
SKNIS, in terms of getting information out to the public with respect to disasters. Now, when we talk about disasters, some people, foremost in their minds, is when a disaster impacts a place or impacts people, but disaster preparedness has to go beyond emergency relief and life-saving actions and should begin with mitigation and prevention that include a combination of environmental, social, and economic aspects. Mr. Pemberton, you are here today in your capacity to talk about the damage assessment and needs analysis subcommittee. The National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, has the St. Kitts and Nevis National Disaster Plan. And in that plan, it has 10 subcommittees that deal with various areas of disaster preparedness, disaster management, and I would just name them. It has the medical and public health subcommittee, the transport subcommittee, education, communication, and warning subcommittee, which I chair, the housing and shelter subcommittee, damage assessment and evaluation subcommittee, environment subcommittee, foreign assistance subcommittee, welfare relief supplies and shelter management subcommittee, utilities subcommittee, search, rescue, and initial clearance subcommittee. So you are here today in your capacity as damage assessment and needs analysis subcommittee. What is the objective or what is the purpose, Mr. Pemberton, of this subcommittee?
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams. The damage assessment and needs committee forms an integral part of the overall national mechanism. It is important whenever our federation is exposed to any hazard, it is important for us to, one, know what was there before. And if we know what was there before, then we can then assess the level of impact that that particular hazard would have had on the federation. We have a particular mechanism that we use in order to do damage assessment. And what this does is that it allows us to use a systematic methodology for doing the assessment. It means that all of the persons who are doing the assessment, they would have been trained, they will be following the same methodology so that the information that comes out will be very consistent. Now, the damage assessment will then inform identifying what our needs are. Because as you would have pointed out earlier, the NEMA, which is like the brain of managing comprehensive disaster within the Federation, all of the information has to go back there for decisions to be made and then forwarded to the relevant authority for onward transmission. So damage assessment is very, very important because it is out of the assessing the damage that we will be able to come up with what the needs are.
Mm-hmm. Now, Mr. Pemberton, you have to come up with a plan, of course, which is damage and needs assessment plan. Mm-hmm. And you have to design that plan. Now, what would you use as guidelines to design a damage and needs assessment plan?
Okay, actually, Mr. Williams, what we do is that we have what we call teams, and they are inter-agency teams, because no one institution will be able to do all of the assessment. So there is what we call team, and what we do is that we provide training for these persons so that in the event they have to carry out the damage assessment, they are fully trained and able to carry out the assessment. So we train persons. For example, we have persons from the utility companies who will come and receive the training. We have persons who will come from Ministry of Finance, for example. We have persons who will come from National Housing Corporation. So there are a number of entities that we target to try to build that team. I give you another example. If we look at, for example, agriculture have their own experts. And so when we're doing the damage assessment in agriculture, we're expecting the persons, the experts in agriculture, to be able to do that and then report up. And then a final report will be prepared and forwarded to NEMA or the NEOC.
Right. Now what role does the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA, and the sub-regional, which we have the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, what role do they play in terms of the guidelines with respect to shaping, designing a damage and needs assessment plan?
Okay, thank you very much again for that question. Now, we are part of a regional body, as you would have correctly appointed. CDEMA gives us a lot of support, and they help in the drafting, in the refining of the damage assessment and needs analysis policy. They encourage us to actually come up with a policy that is tailored towards our local situation, and so they will provide whatever support that we require of them. All right, they try not to reinvent the wheel, as it were, but we look at what we call benchmarking. We look at best practices out there, and we take those and try to adopt them to fit our local situation.
Right. Now, whenever a disaster impacts the Federation, let's use the Federation, you have to make an assessment of the damages, and you have to also make, coming out of the assessment of the damages, you have to determine what the needs are. Now, how do you train people in terms of damage assessment? How would you know how to assess? What skills do people have in assessing? What type of a training is provided so that people can make proper assessment?
Okay, thank you again, Mr. Williams, for that question. Now, the persons who we utilize to carry out damage assessment, we try to provide them with training. And as I would have mentioned earlier, we have a predetermined methodology that we use in order to carry out assessment. We have levels of damage, for example. We use what we call a decision tree when we're in the field, and that decision tree allows you to go step by step to determine the level of damage. I'll give you an example, Mr. Williams. If we're looking at a structure, we ask a question: is the structure damaged? If the answer is no, then we proceed to the other building. If the answer is yes, we ask another question: is damage minimal and easily repaired? If the answer is yes, then we assign level 1. Okay? If the answer is no, then we continue and we go on to the other level. So each person who is charged with carrying out damage assessment, they would have received some form of training so that everyone knows when you see level 1, what it means. When you see level 2, you know what it means. When you see level 3, you know what it means. And when you see level 4, you know what it means. And just in case there are some persons who might indicate that we're not too sure between level 2 and level 3, as the case may be, what we train them for, we say, if you're not sure, you go 1 level up. Okay? And from time to time, we have refresher courses to ensure that everyone is on the same page. I must mention, Mr. Williams, that in order for us to do damage assessment, we need volunteers. And we take it all the way down to the community level. Okay? And we provide training for all of the persons, as I would have indicated earlier, because we want to have systematic collection of data so that we can make the best informed decisions based on the data that we receive.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pemberton. Now, Ms. Rodriguez, I understand that NEMA now has a media studio under the directorship of Mr. Abdia Samuel. NEMA has been able to acquire quite a bit, and he has been able to acquire equipment that can help you with your communication. Could you speak a little bit to that, how the media studio is being used to help at NEMA with the communication?
Indeed, we're excited at NEMA to announce that we now have, I would say, state-of-the-art studio. And before I actually go into the purposes it was used, I must use this opportunity to thank a number of persons who would have assisted in helping us to establish the studio. With regards to the studio, we have gotten help, especially from the interns from TVEMS, who would have given great assistance in assisting us in setting the studio up. We will be using the studio for the dissemination of our From Danger to Safety program. It's going to be aired there, as well as our studio will be available for persons who are interested in renting from the agency and also utilizing the facility there. And I must mention that we have a number of initiatives planned also, that the residents will see in over the next couple of months, and all of it will be coming out from that studio. Yes.
Right. Now, what are some of you're new on the job, but what are some of the things that you have in mind, or, some of the initiatives that you would like to introduce?
Well, I'm happy that you asked that, because one of the initiatives that I would have introduced was the rebranding of the agency platforms, and through digital transformation with the assistance again of the internship program from the Division of Technical, Vocational, Educational and Management Studies, which is TVEMS, at the Clarence Fitzroy Bryan College, CFBC. I must say, over the past 6 weeks, we at the communication unit at NEMA, and in collaboration with Dr. Ricardo Neal, one of the lecturers at TVEM, and four of the students have been rebranding our social platform in our Facebook page, our website, our Twitter page, and YouTube pages. And by the end of this week, I must announce that the public will be seeing the new homepages of our social platforms, as well as the new branding of the agency. With regards to our website, the residents will be seeing a more interactive website. Also, the dissemination of our information, we're using more interactive tiles, that can engage and reach our residents. Also, a part of the initiative, we have used, explore different forums in which we can disseminate our information and get our information across, because in our society, different persons are drawn to different mediums. So we have been engaged in the local artists, and I must say there are 3 or 4 of them who have come on board with us voluntarily, I must say that, voluntarily, to give their services so as to add an art form to the dissemination of our information. I would really like to single out these 4 young men, because they have done a remarkable job with our social platforms. I would hope that their parents especially are listening and at this time, because they have transformed the agency's platform remarkably. And you would hear me saying remarkably so many times. These young men are, and I will now name them and the task they were assigned: Clarice Ward, who, and I must stress this point, single-handedly transformed the homepage of NEMA's website, all alone. The first day he would have started, I mentioned to him, I think we can do some work with NEMA's webpage, make it more engaging, interesting, make it more, I would like to use the word maybe a little bit more modernized. And he has done a fantastic job. I was hoping to bring a little sample, but it would have been too much to actually put down. But I am assured that by the end of this week, residents will be seeing that new homepage. The second remarkable youth that has displayed great talent, skills, and expertise, Anthony Jitlal. Anthony was tasked with creating the tiles for dissemination, or a YouTube and Twitter page. You'd simply just have to tell Anthony what you needed, and he would replicate the image of what you're looking for. So that was quite interesting. The third remarkable youth who would have assisted in this great venture and displayed talent, skills, and expertise is Naeem Richardson. Naeem is extremely gifted in video editing. He's a speed editor, and I must say, Naeem was also tasked with our Facebook page and our interactive PSAs, so the public will be seeing more of that by the end of this week into next week. And the last, fourth remarkable youth that I must mention is Javed Allen. Javed is very skilled and artistic, and he gets the job done. With whatever he is tasked with, he was responsible for our WhatsApp page, as well as to create new styles and design for our letterhead and company logos. Now, please permit me to reiterate that these young men have truly done an incredible job transforming the agency platforms over the 6 weeks with us. And to their parents, family, lecturers, community, and friends, you have done a superb job with each of these young men, and they will be young men to be looking out for, because they will be definitely transforming our digital world. All right? Yes. That is with regards to our social platforms. Also, there are some other initiatives. Should I proceed?
Sure, go right ahead.
Yes, thank you. One of the initiative also that I have been engaging the social services on a program geared on interviewing the elderly on their worst disaster experience in history. Now, at the communication unit at NEMA, we're looking forward to host this program in collaboration with the Department of Community Development and the Social Services. This program is geared towards engaging the senior citizens and others within our community on their worst storm or hurricane experiences that they can recall in history.
Okay, why the focus on the older persons, on the senior persons? Why you want to focus it on the elderly?
Well, it is interesting that you asked that. I do believe that the elderly has a wealth of information that can be shared. I do believe that it's using them to tell us what their experiences would have been and how they would have handled it. I believe it may help to curb and change the culture here of the residents here in St. Kitts and Nevis in their responses to disaster.
Right. So while you focus on their experiences, probably when they were perhaps younger, and what their worst disaster has been, they are now at a different age and stage of development in life, where they probably will be. They are in that bracket of people who would be vulnerable in terms of disasters. So while you're focusing on their worst disaster experience, it could be a disaster that happened last week, but at the very same time to focus on, somehow their vulnerability.
Correct.
And how disasters can impact them much more significantly than it can impact people who are much more able, and what can be done to protect our elderly against these natural disasters.
Well, with the able assistance of our volunteers and our district managers, we have our shelters that are available, and I do believe Mistress Petty would have done a fantastic job in mapping out those vulnerable persons within the districts on the map, so we are aware at the agency of those persons who will be needing assistance in the event of a disaster. So the district managers will definitely focus on those persons, ensuring if they need to get to be removed to a safer place, that will be done in that event. Yes.
So the NEMA is collaborating with the social services on interviewing the elderly on their worst disaster experience in history. Okay, you've started already? Or you?
Well, the idea was, the truth is, Mr. Williams, COVID has really affected this getting off. Because initially, I must say, when the plan was, when I was discussing it with the team, the idea of going and visit the homes and doing the interview, then we had to take a step back again and revisit it because, of course, as you know, COVID is on the rise. And I was suggesting a virtual discussion, but most of the elderly, I was told by one of the district managers that, they're saying that we need to do it the old way, If we can't do it the right way, then we can't do it at all. So we're looking at different ways in how we can go about that. Maybe choose certain historical areas within the parish or the parishes, and have that interview, maybe on a lawn where persons are, they're great more than 6 feet distance between persons in doing that interview. But we're not only focusing on the elderly. There's another initiative that is ongoing as well that we intend to roll out, which is going into the communities and engaging persons of all ages, asking them questions about, because one of the things that I've observed also with joining NEMA is that I feel and I've recognized that there's still many persons who still are not connected to us and are missing our information, and that is very important for us that we try to correct that culture, not only with the disseminating of our information, but keeping the public engaged as to who NEMA is, what NEMA does, and in
Yes,
that way.
yes. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Now, Mr. Pemberton, in doing a damage and needs assessment, what are some of the things that you're looking for?
Okay, great question, Mr. Williams. First and foremost, we would want to know what pre-impact information was available. We would want to know what particular resources you may have at a local level. Having determined those, we can then look to see where there are shortfalls, and then we can make up for that. Now, let's take, for example, if you know that there is a bridge in this particular community, and there's a chance that this bridge could become inundated with storm surge, for example. That is what we call pre-impact information. So you will know that beforehand. So as an assessor, you would know what was there before. You would know, for example, if it is that this bridge becomes impassable, what can be done in order to allow whether foot traffic or vehicular traffic, maybe an alternate route. So it's important to have that pre-impact information. It's important also to know what your resources are. I must point out, Mr. Williams, that when we are looking at damage assessment, we are looking at saving lives and livelihoods first and foremost. So the bridge might go, but we want to save people's lives. We don't want anybody to die. We want to protect livelihoods. So that is the aim of the damage assessment. And that is why once you would have gone out now and done the assessment, you collect all of the data, it comes in, we are going to have persons who are going to be sitting and making decisions as to what our needs are. I referenced a bridge a while ago. So let's suppose that that bridge goes out, but that particular transportation network is critical. We may need to bring in a temporary bridge to replace that one so that vehicle traffic can, but I can't make the decision, you can't make the decision. But once we report that that is the case, then the powers that be can then send off a request and say, based on the assessment of the damage that we would have done, we have 5 communities that have been cut off, and these persons cannot leave or get back in. We need to have them moving back and forth as quickly as possible, and as a result, we need to construct a temporary bridge to allow them in and out. So this is how it works into determining needs.
Right. So while we talk, you spoke about the saving lives approach.
Yes.
And that is most important,
Yes.
because in any disaster, you want to save lives.
Yes, that is the aim.
That is the aim.
Yes.
And while we may look at infrastructure, bridges and roads and, you know, things like that, the material things, the physical things. In disasters, people are socially displaced. People can be shaken up. People can be traumatized. People can just lose it. People can be fearful. Disasters can evoke all those emotions in us and cause a lot of mental stress, cause anxiety, anguish, and all of that. Uncertainty. I don't have a house. My house is gone. One thing is the house, but the other thing is all those psychosocial impacts that come about because of disaster. Now, your committee, your subcommittee, is your subcommittee involved in assessing those needs as well? Those psychosocial needs of the people?
Thank you, Mr. Williams. You would have recognized that when you gave the subcommittees, you would have named quite a number. I think it's 10 agencies. And there is one there that deals with psychosocial support. So if we have persons, for example, going out and doing assessment, and they recognize that they are persons who are experiencing all of the things that you would have just mentioned, persons who would have lost their homes, persons become emotional because they have just lost and they're dealing with loss, whether it is a loss of a home, a family member. They're going to need that social, psychosocial support. And so the information would be passed on to the relevant agency that is going to provide that need. And that is why I go back and I keep saying, once you're doing the assessment, the needs have to be identified. And one of the things, for example, that we tell our volunteers as we are training them, do not take on responsibilities that you're not trained for. So in your assessment, you identify that there are persons who need psychosocial support, you make a note of it. It will come back to the agency, and the relevant authority, competent authority, will be deployed to deal with those matters.
Right, so you're only doing the damage assessment, the needs analysis, and you take that to the back. You take it back to the agency.
Yes.
And then the agency will determine what resources will go where, and what resources are needed to be able to deal with this particular need or to fix this particular damage. Now, after a disaster, how much time do you have really? Or what would be the required time or ideal time in which you can do an assessment? Because the assessment is important.
Yes.
In terms of, if you take too long to do the assessment, more damage can be done.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for that question, Mr. Williams. Now, time and timing are critical. So we encourage our assessors to do the assessment and report within certain specific timelines. The first 8 hours after the all clear, critical. Okay? Even before we do that, sometimes it is necessary to do what we call a reconnaissance flight. So whether you're going to use a drone or you're going to use a plane, and you fly over to get a bird's eye view as to what the extent of the damage is. All right. Then we have what we call initial damage assessment. We have what we call detailed sector assessment, all right? And as I would have mentioned, it is important that this information is coming back in a timely manner. Why? Because let's say that the entire Caribbean has been impacted by a particular hazard. Every country will be going after the same resources. So the person or the country that brings in the information quickest and accurate as possible stands the best chance of tapping into the resources. And that is why you would have heard me mention earlier that we come up with a systematic methodology of doing damage assessment, so that when we do submit our report and a request is made for supplying our needs, it is very easy to verify that what is said in the assessment report is actually correct. All right? Let me give you another example, Mr. Williams. If the assessment is done correctly, we will be able to identify our needs. For example, if our need is, say, water, we would not want somebody to send us something else. So that is why it's very important to do the assessment correctly and accurately so that our needs, our immediate needs, can be satisfied.
Right, the real needs.
The real needs.
Mm-hmm. Now, what would be some of the factors that can perhaps hamper the damage and needs assessment?
Well, Mr. Williams, we have volunteers. We depend on volunteers. And whenever there is a disaster, persons are impacted differently. So you can have some persons who don't show up. Even though they receive the training at that particular time, they may be so overwhelmed with the situation that they are not able to do the assessment. And that is why I mentioned earlier that pre-impact information is very critical. Because in the event that you can't get the volunteers to come and actually go out into the field and do what they're supposed to be doing, if you know what was there before, you're in a good position to be able to assess the extent of the damage. I give you a typical example. We have a housing development. All of that information is resident with, let's say, the physical planning department. So if that particular area is impacted, if we cannot go out, at least we can go to the physical planning, know what was there before, and be able to make an assessment as to the extent of the damage. So oftentimes, persons do not understand that though they may be the keepers of information and or data, when it comes to the national effort, they cannot hold on to that data. They need to share that data with the relevant authorities. So that is a point I wanted to make right there.
Okay. Now, Michelle, the International Day of Disaster Reduction is coming up. What can you tell us about that day, its importance, and what the agency, NEMA, has planned in terms of commemorating the IDDR?
So, Williams, IDDR is International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. Now, International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction is a day that is set aside to celebrate how people and communities around the world are reducing their exposure to disasters. It is also a day set aside to raising awareness about the importance of reining in the risks that they face. It's an opportunity to acknowledge the progress being made toward reducing disaster risk and losses in lives, livelihoods, and health. The 2021 edition will focus on international cooperation for developing countries to reduce their disaster risk and disaster losses. The United Nations stated that this year, 2021, promises to be a make or break year when it comes to delivering on the policy agenda agreed in 2015. Sorry. Without real action on climate in the next 10 years, extreme weather, like you were discussing earlier, events will be overwhelming, especially for developing countries. IDDR, I must say, began in 1989 after a call by the United Nations General Assembly for a day to promote a global culture of risk awareness and disaster reduction. And the 2016 edition marks the launch of the new Sendai 7 campaign centered on the 7 targets of the Sendai framework, the first of which is reducing disaster mortality. Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030 was adopted by the UN member states on the 18th of March 2015 at the 3rd UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Sendai City, the capital city of Meiji Prefecture, Japan, the largest city in Tohoku region and the second largest city north of Tokyo. Now, International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction is normally seen as, they say, as a NEMA Day, right? And we do have a number of activities listed for here in St. Kitts for this commemorating this day. Okay, let me mention the activities. Okay, so on Wednesday, which is let me go from Friday actually. This Friday, we will be launching the IDDR 2021 Finding NEMA Scavenger Hunt. And I can provide the guidelines for that activity. And on Monday, next Monday, we'll be having a church service, which will be Monday the 11th, I believe.
So what are the guidelines for the
IDDR? Okay,
Yes.
sure. A scavenger hunt. This event is open to the general public. Unfortunately, those in quarantine or isolation may not be able to participate, as some of the tasks may require the participants to venture outside. Participants will be given a number of tasks, and participants must finish all tasks in order to win. There will be first, second, and third prizes. Participants will be issued the next task upon completion of the previous task. A participant will be disqualified if they do not complete all the tasks. The first task will be given on October 8th, which is this Friday. And all tasks must be submitted by Wednesday the 13th of October at 12 p.m. And winners will be announced on Wednesday the 13th of October during the NEOC briefing.
Okay.
I'm quite sure the listening public may want to know what the prizes are. So for the first prize, we have the tarpaulin first aid kit, cooler, box of face mask. The second prize, tarpaulin, flashlight, box of face mask. And the third prize, flashlight and box of face mask. Thank you.
Now go ahead, that was only one. You were naming a number of activities.
Oh, well, I did mention it here. We started on Friday with the scavenger hunt. Some of our activities that we would have had scheduled, we would have had to eliminate them unfortunately, due to the current situation with COVID. But for Friday, we started the scavenger hunt, like I said. On Monday, we're having the church service. On Wednesday, we're going to be having, on the day of itself, the Minister Phipps, the Honorable Minister Phipps will be giving a speech on the commemoration of the day.
Okay, right. Now, and Minister Phipps, of course, is the co-chair of the Disaster Mitigation Council.
Correct.
And that is why she will be doing that speech in that capacity. Now, Mr. Pemberton, the gathering of information, because that is basically what you are doing, in terms of the damage assessment. You are gathering information based on the reality on the ground.
Correct.
What would have taken place,
Correct.
the impact
Correct.
on people, on infrastructure, on crops, and all of that. And based on your assessment, that would inform, you know, what needs to be done to meet the needs of the people. And that is how your subcommittee is connected to things like foreign assistance
Correct.
subcommittee.
Yes.
And I don't know if you were here that time when Kervin was here, were you?
No, I will not.
You
I
were
was
not here. But Kervin Lloyd was here, and you know he gave a very good, a very comprehensive.
They're actually a part of the damage assessment and recovery committee.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So that is important because then, based on your assessment, other committees would have to come in terms of getting the resources to really address those needs that are there.
Yeah, and it goes a little bit further to Mr. Williams, because all of these entities, they are actually expected to report up to the chair of the Damage Assessment and Recovery Committee.
Yes.
And then the chair is responsible for compiling a report and then forwarding that report to NEMA for onward transmission. So it is important for all of the entities to understand that they have a key role to play, and they have to submit their information in a timely
Right.
manner so that the reporting can be done in a timely manner.
So
also.
part of your thing really that will be post-disaster has to do with gathering information from
Yes.
the members of the NEOC
Yes.
regarding the damage and the needs from the disaster. So you have to gather information from the other members of NEOC.
Not NEOC, but of the Damage Assessment and Recovery Committee.
Yes, within 7 days.
Yes, because what we have to understand is that when we have been impacted, nothing is standing still. Things are continually moving, and so we have to be doing things in a timely manner, in an accurate manner, to ensure that we can respond to persons' needs and we can save lives and livelihoods. I don't think I can emphasize
Right.
emphasize that enough.
So some of the things that would be placed in your report would be things like relating to the population, how many people injured, how many people that are dead, housing being schools,
housing,
your
schools,
seaports, your airports,
hospitals, and so on. All of these things would have
the main industries, for example, our tourism industry,
correct.
public utilities, we have to
Correct.
do water, electricity,
Yes.
government buildings,
Buildings.
administrative buildings,
Yes.
TV networks and radio stations, and all of that, clinics, the environment, and all of that.
Yes. The
But that
environment.
might take a longer time in terms of, to get all that assessment in. But immediately after the disaster, you have to give something within a short time.
Yes.
You cannot wait until 14 days. So you have different stages.
Correct.
So you have to give an initial assessment,
Correct.
which is basically more short term,
Yes.
and then you can look at something that is
Yes. Yes. As I would have said, it is important because everything has to be timed. Okay, everything has to be timed, and you are correct. Having received the all clear, the assessors would actually be out picking up the necessary data. You have the relevant forms, you fill in the information on the form, you send it in, it is collated, a report is made and forwarded. But reports will be generated in intervals. So within the first 8 hours, a report will come. You can get the report in an hour, depending on the extent of the damage. You can get the report in 2 hours, 3 hours, and so on. But within the first 8 hours, a report will be generated. Then normally within 3 days, we tend to give a report so that we can identify what are our immediate needs. What you would have said, the recovery process is a longer term process, all right? But you can only recover if we have identified how much you have been impacted, the extent of the impact. You mentioned, for example, government buildings. Government buildings have been impacted, schools have been impacted. We have to assess the extent of the damage. We oftentimes will put a dollar figure to how much it will cost in order for us to restore the particular school.
To reconstruct.
Or to rehabilitate, as the case may be. But these are things that are a little bit more long term. And that is why when we do damage assessment, we do the initial damage assessment, and then we do what we call detailed sector assessment. In the detailed sector assessment, we are more using experts. So, for example, if we have something of a structural nature, we will utilize the engineers. If we have a situation where the water lines are down, we go to the persons from the water department. We will go to persons from SCELEC because they are the ones who are trained in these things. And so they in turn will report the information in, and then that information would form part of the report and go on to the relevant authority for decision making.
Who will make the assessment in terms of, you mentioned, in dollars and cents? Like, for example, many times you hear when there is a disaster, you hear people said billions or $3 billion and things like that. How is that done, and who makes that assessment that this has been what the country has suffered? The country has suffered $10 million in damages.
Okay, all right. I'll attempt to explain how that is often done. Let's say, for example, there is inundation of our beaches. We would find the persons in the environment who are trained in this area. They will give an assessment as to the damage to the beach. That will come in. We will have persons who are reporting, let's say, in agriculture. We have this damage in agriculture, they put a dollar figure to that comes in, all right? We have persons, let's say, in the health sector, they assess the damage, they put a dollar figure to that. All of this information is coming in, then it has to be collated and put together. And then an announcement will be made. Now there's only one person who is authorized to make that announcement as to the cost of the particular disaster. I cannot make that.
It is the head of government, the Prime Minister.
Correct. Correct. So all we are responsible for is collate and report. And then they would know and decide how they're going to put that information out there.
Right. Now, your committee, I know we were talking there in terms of post-disaster, but pre-disaster, Mr. Pemberton, do you do an assessment, for example, of what the government currently has in its database, its capital stock inventory, you know, and that is maintained for all government property and resources?
Very good question, Mr. Williams, and that is why I said pre-impact information is very, very important. We have been emphasizing over the past years that you need to know what you have pre-impact or before anything happens. All right? If you know what you have before, it is easier for you to assess the impact. One of the other things that we're emphasizing is resilience. So you would have discovered, or we would have recognized, for example, that our building codes would have been adjusted to make sure that our building stock is more resilient. And so if we are visited by our friends in the hurricane, we may have very little impact because of our resilience. So it is important that each line ministry, you should know what your stock is and keep it recorded, not in somebody's head, so that when the person moves on, they take the information with them. All right? So we have to understand that the more information we have prior to the onset of the particular hazard, the better it is for us, and the better it is to help us to be able to respond and to do accurate assessment. So that is the point I wanted to get across.
Right. Okay. Michelle, you mentioned earlier, but I would like a little bit more, in terms of NEMA's continued engagement with its internal units as well as its external units. And why is that so crucial in disaster management?
Mr. Williams, before I jump into it, I erred earlier in mentioning when you would have asked about the initiatives that NEMA would have undergo. I forgot to have mentioned that NEMA now has the technological capabilities with our interactive boards. I do believe you would have also experienced that, to walk the general public through our messaging with the Senior Met Officer, Mr. Elmo Burke. So we now have the interactive maps, and to plot out on the maps showing residents, if a hurricane is coming, where exactly, and so that I believe we're very proud of, and we're very happy to have arrived at that stage.
I think we saw it in operation.
Yes.
Just recently.
Yes.
And
you were there.
Yeah, we looked very international,
And also I must mention that we have the emergency broadcast interruption system. The emergency alert system, which is the EAS, is a national public warning system that requires all media houses, cable TVs, wireless cable systems, and satellite service providers to provide the Prime Minister or an authorized person at the National Emergency Management Agency with the capabilities to disseminate a warning to everyone on St. Kitts and Nevis during a national emergency. And I must say that the introduction of this system will also enhance our messaging here at the agency and also our tsunami readiness programs, right? The agency has been in discussion with the media houses in both St. Kitts and Nevis as preparations are on the way to roll out this project before the end of this year. So we're really looking at getting this up and running before, the first target was by the end of October, but we're saying before the end of the year. And we have engaged a number of media houses, Win FM, it is Win FM, Von Radio, ZIZ, Freedom FM. These stations, the reason why we have selected these first 4 stations, because at the moment we only have 4 transmitters. And we have decided to work with these stations because they have the fiber that is needed and which will be economical for us to start to install the transmitters. With regards to your question in engaging the various units, so we have been engaging the unit head and the agency for their continued support and cooperation with all the initiatives ongoing at the agency. And I must commend the camaraderie at the unit, at the agency, especially amongst all unit heads, the district volunteers, the youth ambassadors, also the Nevis Disaster Management Agency, and I must mention Nevis also, and the stakeholders and local artists, even ZIZ, who has continually been airing our program from danger to safety. It is quite important that we keep the open interaction with the stakeholders and agency to disseminate. So we're using all of these forums to reach near and wide our residents in the event of communicating our messages in the event of a disaster within our federation.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
And it is quite critical that we do so because we cannot stand alone. We need the assistance, the able help of SKNIS as well, and all the media houses in disseminating our information.
An important part that I realized that the agency played, especially when they had the eruption of the La Soufrière volcano in St. Vincent, is that of emergency relief.
Yes.
And through Mr. Samuel, the director of NEMA, we saw that the agency was very instrumental in gathering emergency relief.
Yes.
Not just not for us, but in terms of our neighbors in the St. Vincent and the Grenadines who
That's
had
correct.
suffered this disaster.
Yes.
So the agency plays an important role in terms of support, not just locally, but regionally as well,
That's
in
correct.
assisting others. And I thought that was remarkable,
Yes.
that the agency is able to actually do that.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, Mr. Pemberton, your committee, of course, people might hear, oh, it's damage assessment, and that it only deals with post-disaster. But as we were saying all along, it's important to know what you have, the resources that you have, because then if you don't know what resources that you have before a disaster, how can you properly determine, how those, when you have done your assessment, if those resources are enough, if you're going to need more, and all of that sort of a thing. So that is actually important. Now we spoke about the macro socioeconomic damage and loss assessment. What about during the disaster and the regional guidelines? Because you're not just operating as a subcommittee, but you're operating on the various guidelines. We mentioned the CDEMA, we mentioned OECS, but all of these things have to be approved by the National Emergency Operations Center.
Yes, Mr. Williams. As I would have explained, all of these agencies, CDEMA, OECS, and so on, they communicate directly with the NEOC. So once the reports would have been compiled and they would have been forwarded to NEOC, as it were, they are the ones who will communicate directly with CDEMA and with the OECS and with other agencies. Our committee does not and cannot divulge any information that we would have gathered through the assessment process. We can only compile the report and pass that report on to NEOC for further transmission. We cannot divulge anything out of that report to anybody. Okay? We are not the authorized authority to do that. We just compile the report and we send it forward. All of the communication goes through the NEOC, as it were.
Okay, I'm going to open the phone lines, and for whatever time that we have left, if people have some questions that they would like to ask. The numbers to call are 466-2666. That is 466-2666, 662-8674, 662-8674, 767-4765, 767-4765, and the overseas number is 1-239-6 645 4500. We await your calls. Right. Michelle, tell us a little bit in terms of your new role as PRO at NEMA and what you would like to see happen in terms of the communication. What is your vision for communications at NEMA? What is your vision for how NEMA can perhaps better relate to the public in terms of disasters, disaster preparedness, and so on?
Thanks, Mr. Williams, for that question. Very good question. My role at NEMA is for the dissemination of information, keeping the public aware, alert of all that is happening pertaining to disaster that would likely to affect or harm or endanger the residents in any way. My role in starting with NEMA, I would like to ensure, and it's just one of the biggest tasks, I would say, is to ensure that NEMA is reached, our messaging is reached the entire Federation. When we looked at an assessment of how many persons we're reaching on our social platform, it was not enough. So the objective is to meet a number of persons, all the residents if possible, both St. Kitts and Nevis, because especially it is concerning and quite alarming in the event we have to disseminate information that is pertaining to people's safety and well-being. We would like to know that we're able to hit every household. Everybody are aware of who NEMA is, what NEMA does, our role and responsibility, and to have that confidence and trust in our messaging. We would have seen recently in the last hurricane that persons were, there were misinformations circulating in social media by other persons who are sourcing information from elsewhere, and it is kind of driving that fear and panic within our residents. And some people felt when we were not telling, when they were being told by whatever medium they were using that this hurricane is going to hit us directly, and we were not singing the same tune, many persons felt we were not acting fast enough. But what we were advised by the Met Office, by the senior Met Officer, Mr. Elmo Burke, it's that when it is within 40 meters of our monitoring areas, that is when they will begin to disseminate certain information to the public, because weather is very dynamic and you may see a storm, but you cannot necessarily say in the very early that is going to hit us, because what you do is you cause panic and fear amongst our residents, and we really want to move away from that. We want to ensure that if we give the information must be as accurate as possible, and people must be able to rely on us. So, that's the culture we're trying to, bring people to NEMA, help people to understand that they need to depend upon us, the agency, the National Emergency Management Agency, for this kind of information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned, very important, that trust in the agency is extremely important.
Yes.
Because, especially when it comes to disasters, you want to know that you have information that you can trust.
Yes. Correct.
Because, and the communication and how you communicate, that is extremely important, because that can have detrimental impacts based on how you communicate.
Yes.
If your communication is not effective, if your communication is ambiguous, if your communication is not timely, if your communication is not accurate, and all of those sort of things, those can create greater disasters
Yes. Fear
So you
and
will
panic.
have a disaster within a disaster,
Yes.
because it's all about communicating and getting it right. Because if a hurricane is supposed to impact us at 10 o'clock, and you give information 10 o'clock tonight, and you give information that the hurricane is going to impact us tomorrow morning, then that can have serious impact, because then people will not prepare for 10 o'clock. No, people will not prepare for the, when it will actually arrive. Or when and that can have serious consequences. So it is important that, the information is reliable.
Yes. And I must add, Mr. Williams, that we are in constant communication with the Met Office. We have a very good rapport with them. So whenever we are tracking storms that comes off of the coast, the African coast, we would keep abreast. We will keep monitoring the system along with the Met Office, which is why persons need to trust our messaging, because we're not going to come out and send a panic message. And because I know many persons were expecting, based on what they were told by the source that they were getting that information, that we were going to have a direct hit. And some people started to get there was a panic frenzy in the atmosphere. But we're grateful that that did not happen. We have been spared.
Right. Livingston, do you do any sort of a simulation exercise with respect to test rapid damage assessment and recovery and rehabilitation capability? Because that is very important on an annual basis. So in other words, your role, your function as this subcommittee, the Damage Assessment and Needs Analysis Subcommittee, that you just don't, as soon as when a hurricane impacts, then you say you're going to do whatever. Do you have simulation exercises?
Okay, thank you.
Do you
very much.
practice, in other words?
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams, for that question. Part of the mandate is to constantly train persons, because we believe that the more we train, if we have to execute, it becomes second nature. And so what we try to do throughout the year is to ensure that we are training persons on how to go about doing damage assessment. As part of the training, we will have simulation exercises. We create scenarios, and we have the persons who are part of the training. They actually have to implement the tools and the guidelines that they would be exposed to. And in the end, what we try to do is to get them to generate what we call like a mock report that would identify the assessment and the needs. So they do get an opportunity to practice. One of the things that we do say, though, Mr. Williams, is that we take pleasure in training you, but we hope that you never have to use the information. But we take pleasure in passing the information on to you. Because if you don't use it, it means that we are not being impacted. And if we are not being impacted, it means that lives and livelihoods have been maintained. All right? But we take pleasure in training persons to do damage assessment and needs analysis.
Right. Now we are out of time, and I want to know if there's anything that you would like to say before we go. Michelle?
I just would like to say, Mr. Williams, thank you very much for having us here. It was really a pleasure being here and for sharing our information, especially our week of activities for the IDDRR. We would really like to encourage persons to sign up to our scavenger hunt activity, which is set for Friday. It starts on Friday. We will be disseminating, as we speak, tiles into the public, so persons will see the information and will log on and sign on to our activity.
Mr. Pemberton?
Thank you, Mr. Williams. I would just like to appeal to us all to understand that we are looking at comprehensive disaster management. We do not know what will happen, when it will happen. We talk a lot about hurricanes, but we can have an earthquake. And so we're just asking persons to constantly be in a state of readiness, do all that you can within your power to be ready, to be resilient. And we trust and hope that God will continue to bless us as we continue to endure.
Right, so I want to thank all two of you. I want to thank you, Michelle Rodriguez. That's not a Spanish surname, right? Not really. It almost sounds like a Spanish surname. The Public Relations Officer at NEMA. Thank you very much and all the best in your role. It's your first time on this program,
Yes.
and I'm sure it will not be the last time on
Thank
this
you very
program.
much.
So thank you very much. And Mr. Livingston Pemberton, the Chief Engineer at the Public Works Department, who has filled in today for Mr. George Gilbert, who is the chair of the Damage Assessment and Needs Analysis Subcommittee. And I think he did a wonderful job in filling the shoes of the chair of that subcommittee. So thank you very much, Livingston, and thank you very much, Michelle. And thank you to all of our listeners to today's program. We did not have any caller today, but I am sure that many persons were listening, and I want to thank you. We cannot forget that we are still in the hurricane season, and that we must constantly be prepared in the eventuality that we are impacted by a hurricane. But of course, we must always be prepared, not just for hurricanes, because we've heard Haiti the other day had an earthquake. Sometimes, time from time, we're feeling earthquakes here and there, right in the Federation. And with climate change and what is happening in our world, anything is possible. And our preparation is key to mitigate the detrimental impacts of disasters. Until next week, we will be back for another Working for You program. I am Les Roy Williams. Take good care.
Listening every Saturday from 4 p.m. to the Mega Mix Show with Magic Fingers, Ronnie Rascal on ZIZ Radio 96 FM. This is the sound and show you love. The Mega Mix Show with Magic Fingers, Ronnie Rascal. The whole wide world is tuned in and listening, and now tune in